What does Isaiah chapter 31 mean? Isaiah 31 covers similar subject matter to the previous chapter, but in a condensed format. Isaiah begins by predicting misery, declaring woe on those who seek Egyptian help against an Assyrian invasion. They are trusting in earthly war tools, which Egypt apparently had in abundance. The words predict woe for those who don't look to the Lord God, but instead rely on other nations, Isaiah 31:1. Despite what Judah seems to think, the Lord is both wise and strong. Unlike Egypt, he won't change his mind or go back on his word. The Egyptians are merely men. The Lord is God. Their horses are only flesh. He is spirit. The Lord will bring disaster against both Judah and her helper Egypt. Kosing Besia 31, 2-3. After that, though, the Lord will stand against the Assyrians to save Jerusalem from their attack. He will be like a powerful lion that attacks a flock without being afraid of the shepherds. He will hurt Isaiah 31:4-5. Isaiah then calls for the children of Israel to turn back to the God they have rebelled against. That will only happen when the people throw away the idols they have made, which they worship instead of the Lord. Isaiah 31:6-7. When the people repent and return to the Lord, he will turn to attack the Assyrians. Their defeat may come in battle, but the real cause will be God's supernatural power. Assyrian men will be enslaved. The king of Assyria, their rock, will die in terror. The Kings of Isaiah 31:8-9. 2 Samuel 10:1-12-31 is kind of a chiasm. A. The Israelites fight the Ammonites to avenge. 2 Samuel 10. B. David sins against and dishonors Uriah and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 11. C. God confronts David with his sin. 2 Samuel 12:1-15. B. God returns justice and honor to Uriah and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 12:15-25a. Israel defeats the Ammonites, restoring Israel's honor. 2 Samuel 12:26-31. While the army battled the Ammonites, David slept with Bathsheba, the wife of one of his warriors. When she told him she was pregnant, David first tried to get her husband, Uriah, to sleep with her. When that didn't work, David arranged for Uriah's death at the hands of the Ammonites. Then married Bathsheba, thinking everyone would believe the child was legitimately David's. 2 Samuel 11. But God knows, and he tells Nathan the prophet. Nathan comes to David and reports an incident about two men, one rich and one poor. The rich man owns many flocks of sheep and herds of cattle. The poor man owns only one young ewe that he has raised like a daughter. When a traveler arrives at the rich man's house, the rich man steals the poor man's beloved lamb for their meal. David is outraged, declaring that the rich man deserves to die and shall be forced to repay the poor man the full restitution required by the Mosaic law. 2 Samuel 12:1-6. Nathan tells David that he is the rich man. God anointed David king over Israel, saved him from Saul, gave him all of Saul's household and wives, and handed David the throne over a united Israel. David committed adultery and murder, despising the law of the God who blessed him. David repents. God forgives him, but still demands justice for Uriah and Bathsheba. David's family will be plagued with violence for the rest of his life. A rebelling family member will publicly humiliate him. The child, Bashiri, who should have been Uriah's, will 2 Samuel 7. The baby soon becomes sick. David fasts and prays until the child dies, hoping God will change the child's fate. Once the boy is dead, David cleans himself up and worships God. David takes comfort that he'll see this son in the afterlife. 2 Samuel 12:15-23. God also gives Bathsheba justice. David took away her loving husband and their potential to have children. In return, David comforts Bathsheba, and God gives her a son, Solomon, who will be king after David, to Samuel 12:24-25. Meanwhile, Joab is close to finishing the battle against the Ammonites. He calls David to take the finishing strike. The Israelites plunder the city and take the people for forced labor, to Samuel 12:26-31. 2 Samuel 13 sets the stage for the fulfillment of the rest of God's punishments against David, one of David's sons. Amnon rapes his own half-sister, Tamar. Tamar's full brother, Absalom, comforts her and plans his revenge. In the coming chapters, he will murder Tamar's rapist, gain the love and loyalty of the people. Rabot Gansley Ruftait Samuel 14-16. The books of 1 and 2 Chronicles repeat many of the same stories recorded in the books of Samuel. The Chronicles don't mention David's sin, although they record the victory over the Ammonites. 1 Chronicles 20-1-3. The purpose of the Chronicles was to remind the exiles who returned from Babylon of their place among God's chosen people. Ruled by descendants of King David, Psalm 51, however, is David's repentance for his sin. After David sinned against Bathsheba and Uriah, to Samuel 11, God listed a series of curses David would have to endure. They weren't defeat in battle, famine, or plague, although a plague did come later, to Samuel 20:15-17. The curses were tragedy, violence, evil, and betrayal within David's own family. The last, that Bathsheba's son would die, has already happened to Samuel 12:14-18. Into Samuel 13, the next curse begins. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, to Samuel 12:10. The evil starts when David's oldest son, Amnon, indulges in a lustful obsession with his half-sister Tamar. He's frustrated because he can't get to her. She's apparently of marriageable age, but not engaged, so she's protected. His cousin Jonadab comes up with a scheme. Amnon can play sick and ask David to send Tamar to make him something to eat. It's not clear if Jonadab knows what Amnon has in mind once he's with his sister, to Samuel 13:1-5. David sends Tamar to her half-brother Amnon. She fixes food in view of several other people. When she goes to give it to him, he tells the others to leave. He grabs her, and she resists. She points out that what he's about to do is unthinkably evil. If he forces himself on her, she'd live in shame and he'd ruin his own life. Tamar tries to stall Amnon by suggesting that David would let Amnon marry her legitimately. But Amnon ignores her and rapes her, to Samuel 13:6-14. Once he's gratified his lust, Amnon's feelings turn to an even more intense hatred. He tells her to get out. Tamar realizes that her only chance at a somewhat respectable life is for Amnon to marry her. Marrying a half-sibling would be a sin, but for her, that's better than a lifetime with no husband, no honor, and no children. She begs him not to reject her. Amnon orders his servants to throw her out and bolt the door. Tamar, grieving, tears her long robe and puts ashes on her head, crying loudly as she returns home, to Samuel 13. Tamar's full brother Absalom realizes what has happened. He comforts her and gives her a place in his household. When David hears what has happened, he's furious, but apparently does nothing. Absalom's hate is colder and more calculating to Samuel 13:15-22. 2 years later, Absalom plans a sheep-shearing celebration dinner in the hill country of Ephraim. He invites all of David's sons, along with the king himself. David refuses to go but sends Amnon and his other sons. Absalom orders to serve men with wine, on ni signal. And all the rest of David's sons mount their mules and flee the party. The first report David receives is that all his other sons have been killed. Jonadab, though, reassures David that Absalom has only killed Amnon for the crime of raping Tamar. The rest of David's sons soon arrive in Jerusalem and join David and his staff as they mourn for Amnon to Samuel 13:23-36. Absalom flees to the home of his mother's father, Talmai, the king of Geshur, 1 Chronicles 3-2. He lives there for 3 years. David's grief for Amnon eases, and he starts to miss Absalom to Samuel 13:37-39. These horrible events set the stage for the fulfillment of God's curses. Absalom will return, and for 2 years David will neither punish him nor reconcile with him. Absalom will win the hearts of the people and drive David and his household into exile. He will then take David's concubines sexually on the rooftop to humiliate his father, as God promised to Samuel 12:11-12, says 20-22. Despite David's wishes, Joab will strike Absalom down in their battle. We see it's God's plevy, but Samuel 14-19. 2 Samuel chapters 10 through 20 tell one continuous story. The Ammonite king dishonors David's messengers, so ever Samuel dies. While Joab rejoins the battle the next year, David sins against Uriah and Bathsheba to Samuel 11. Nathan, the prophet, confronts David and tells David how God will punish him to Samuel 11:1-14. The first punishment is the death of Bathsheba's son, but God restores what he has taken by giving her Solomon to Samuel 11:15-25. Joab finally beats the Ammonites to Samuel 12:26-31. The effects of God's curse reach David's children. Absalom murders his brother for raping their sister. Then turn to Samuel 13. Joab convinces David to let Absalom return, but David refuses to reconcile with his son for years to Samuel 14. Absalom takes the kingdom from David and sleeps with David's violin to Samuel 15-16. David's men fight for him quando abquis to Samuel 17-18. David is more bereft for Absalom than appreciative of his people. Joab rebukes him, and they return to Jerusalem to Samuel 19:1-15. David forgives his enemies and quells one last rebellion. The people reaffirm their loyalty to him to Samuel 19:16-26. 2 Samuel 14 begins the story of Absalom's rebellion against David. Absalom has already avenged his sister. Tamar's rape and to have glanfod Talmai to Samuel 13. David is preoccupied with unexplained thoughts of Absalom. Joab is David's nephew and military commander to Samuel 13:39. He believes Absalom's extended exile is bad for the country. He schemes to convince David to pardon Absalom and invite him home. Joab calls a wise woman to tell David a story. She says her husband is dead and one of her 2 sons has killed the other. Now her clan has issued an execution order for her surviving son. If they succeed, she will lose her only son, and her husband's family name will vanish from the earth. To Samuel 14, 1-7. The king says he will consider the matter and issue a ruling later. But the woman begs him to save her son and their family's future. Despite clear laws about murder, Numbers 35-30-31, the king agrees to pardon her son. Once David has committed himself to mercy, the woman challenges him to pardon Absalom. God implement 2 Samuel 14, 8-17. David asks if Joab sent her. She affirms his suspicions. David summons Joab and tells him to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem. Estipulat, though, they does not want Absalom, and Absalom cannot re-enter the life of the royal family or government. To Samuel 14, 18-24. Absalom returns to Jerusalem from his banishment in Geshur. He is a handsome man with very thick hair, foreshadowing the nature of his death. After 2 full years, Absalom forces Joab to ask David to reconcile with him. David agrees to Samuel 14, 25-33. The reconciliation sets Absalom up for a greater sin against David. He uses his restored legitimacy to earn the people's favor and loyalty. Within 4 years, he'll be ready to rebel against his father, the king. To Samuel 15, 1-12. After David took Bathsheba and murdered Uriah. To Samuel 11, 1-5. 14-17. God sent the prophet Nathan to tell David the repercussions of his sins. To Samuel 12, 1-7. Because David had Uriah killed with violence, violence would never leave David's household. Because David betrayed his good friend, someone from David's household would betray him. Because David took Uriah's wife, someone in his household would take his wives. The first curse came to pass when David's son Amnon raped his daughter Tamar, and Tamar's full brother Absalom. 1 Samuel 13. The curse of betrayal begins in this chapter. After killing his brother, Absalom fled to his maternal grandfather and stayed in exile for 3 years. To Samuel 13, 37-38. Eventually, David invited him home, but it took another 2 years before he agreed to reconcile. To Samuel 14, 21-24, 28. With his position and dignity restored, Absalom is ready to conspire against his father. Absalom begins by assuming the appearance of royal authority. He travels around Jerusalem in a chariot accompanied by 50 soldiers. He positions himself as the crown prince of Israel in the gate of the city, intercepting those who have come from around Israel to ask the king to settle their disputes. Absalom tells them the king can't help them, that David won't even commission a judge for their tribe, but Absalom would give them justice if he were king. Absalom also refuses to allow the people to bow before him, embracing them, instead 2 Samuel 1:6. After 4 years, Absalom asks David to allow him to go to Hebron to make sacrifices to fulfill an old vow. David agrees. Absalom uses a network of ram's horns to cue his followers to declare him king. He even recruits David's best advisor, Ahithophel, to his side. To Samuel 15, 7-12. When David hears, he quickly warns his servants and everyone loyal to him to flee the city before Absalom arrives. David takes his foreign bodyguard and 600 men from Gath and their families, leaving behind only 10 concubines to care for the house and a few key men to spy on Absalom. To Samuel 15, 13-22. The priests Zadok and Abiathar try to follow David with the ark. David tells them to stay in Jerusalem. David will live or die based on the Lord's will for him, not on the nearness of the ark. On the Mount of Olives, David recruits his friend Hushai to return to Jerusalem. His mission is to counter Ahithophel's counsel and send him news through Zadok's and Abiathar's. Sont 2 Samuel 15, 23-37. As the exiles continue east to the Jordan River, David meets one man who lies to him and another who curses him. Meanwhile, Absalom enters the city and follows. Ahithophel's advice to sleep with David's concubines, a symbol that he is taking authority. This is also the fulfillment of God's third curse on David, yet Hushai manages to counter Ahithophel's other advice enough to save David and his people. Eventually, Joab kills Absalom in battle to Samuel 16-18. David deeply mourns Absalom, but he is finally free of the curse. David and all those loyal to him are fleeing from Jerusalem. David's son Absalom draws nearer. After, for years of secretly gathering support, Absalom has launched his coup and is marching to Israel's capital city to take the throne for himself, to Samuel 15. On his way out of the area, David is met by 2 men with ties to Israel's former king, Saul. The first is Ziba, the servant of Saul's crippled grandson, Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. David had granted Mephibosheth all of Saul's estate and gave him a permanent place at the king's table. David also ordered Saul's servant Ziba for Samuel 9. Ziba meets David just past the summit of the Mount of Olives with a large load of provisions for the exiles. David asks Ziba where Mephibosheth is. Ziba, perhaps lying, says Mephibosheth stayed in Jerusalem, hoping the people would return the throne to his family. David hastily gives Ziba Mephibosheth's estate to Samuel 16-1-4. Further on, David and his men approach the town of Bahurim, just north of the Mount of Olives. A man named Shimei, a Benjamite from Saul's extended family, begins cursing David and throwing rocks. He does this despite David being surrounded by his fiercest group of warriors. Shimei calls David a murderer and a worthless man and tells the king that the Lord is giving the kingdom into Absalom's hands because David is a man of blood, to Samuel 16-5-8. Abishai, David's nephew and general, asks permission to see for speaking David Seno. Absalom's rebellion is God's curse for David's betrayal of Uriah, to Samuel 12:10-11. If Shimei is part of that curse, David will accept God's chastisement. Perhaps if David bears the mistreatment well, God will relent. David commands his men to leave Shimei alone. Shimei continues to yell and throw things while David and his men move on, eventually arriving at the Jordan River about 20 miles away, to Samuel 16-9-14. Meanwhile, David's son Absalom arrives to take the throne of Israel in the company of a huge throng of supporters from throughout Israel. Ahithophel, David's former counselor, is with him. As they settle in, David's friend Hushai greets them. Absalom is wary, but Hushai says he serves the crown, not the man, and Absalom lets him stay, to Samuel 16:15-19. Absalom doesn't know David told Hushai to spy on Absalom and send intelligence through the priests. Abiathar and Zadok, to Samuel 5:30-2:37. Ahithophel knows Absalom needs to make an irreparable break from David and prove his authority to his people. The quickest way to do this is to have sex with the 10 concubines David left behind to care for his house, to Samuel 15:16. Absalom follows through, having sex with each one, in a tent on David's roof to Samuel 16:20-23. God allowed this crime to arrive. Badu Samuel 11:12. This is the last time Absalom follows Ahithophel's advice. Ahithophel asks Absalom for 12,000 warriors to chase down David and destroy him before the people can reach safety. This is exactly the right tactical move. Strike a weak enemy before he can mount a defense. Hushai counters, noting David's warrior skills and suggesting they wait for reinforcements. While they wait, Hushai gets word to David to cross the Jordan. Ahithophel realizes he's been countered and that the rebellion probably won't succeed. So, he commits suicide to Samuel 17:1-23.